All right. Welcome back to the home stretch, ladies and gentlemen. This is week 14 of the spring semester. What, the 80% of the way there, the last 3 weeks, the last 20% of the semester left. So, congratulations on coming this far, and I encourage you to continue working hard as we get through the last 3 weeks of the semester. And really, it's going to be a big focus on the nervous system. So, as I pull up a little bit of a calendar, I don't have a calendar. As I pull up a little bit of a calendar here, we can take a look and we can see that we lie right here in week number. Ooh, that's gonna get you a little bit nauseous there, huh? Week 14. So, week 14, we're looking at chapters 12, chapter 13, and chapter 14 of the OpenStax textbook. But chapter 12 looks at nervous tissue and really the fundamentals of the nervous system. Chapter 13, the anatomy of the nervous system. So, thinking about the parts of the brain, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves. And then chapter 14, the somatic nervous system. When we talk about the somatic nervous system, we're talking a little bit more about the connections. We talk about the sensory or the afferent connections, that's bringing information from the periphery and the inside of the body to the brain and the spinal cord. And then the efferent nerves, or the motor connections, which then the information leaves from the central nervous system, from the brain and spinal cord, and then travels out to the periphery, like initiation of movement. So here we have it. And then, let me finish up some of my housekeeping items first, and then we'll give you a little bit more of an overview. But you can see here that, again, chapters 12, 13, and 14, and then your final exam will be completed not necessarily in a comprehensive, it'll be a sectional exam. So this final exam will focus on chapters 12, 13, and 14, the nervous system specifically. It won't be completely comprehensive, and that will be completed during finals week. So during finals week, the exam will be opened up, and you'll have the opportunity to complete it sometime between, I want to say, between Monday and Thursday. Between Monday and Thursday of finals week, you'll have the opportunity to complete that. So it'll open up on Monday, maybe even open up on Sunday for you guys that may need to take it over the weekend. And then you'll have all the way to the end of the week, Thursday, to have it completed. Again, that's because that's the finals week, and then I've got to have grades but due by the end of the week. So what we'll focus on here is an exam that will open up, again, beginning of the week, sometime maybe Sunday or Monday, and then it will close on Thursday, and that will cover the chapters 12, 13, and 14. As you can see here, chapter 12 is the nervous tissue and fundamentals of the nervous system. So we talk about the divisions of the nervous system here. Let's see if I can't. Focus in here a little bit more about these contexts that we talk about, specifically the nervous tissue. Well, the divisions. So when I talk about the divisions, I'm going to abbreviate it for us: the central nervous system versus the peripheral nervous system. But we also talk about, and I'm going to indent it because this role plays in the same thing, the functional divisions, which are sensory, integration, or like processing, sometimes as it's referred to. And then the last part is motor or efferent, excuse me. So there's some synonyms that you should also learn. Let's talk about this. The efferent versus the afferent nerve right here. So when you see these terms, you should be familiar that they are synonymous. Afferent versus efferent. So sensory is afferent, motor is efferent, right? So a couple of those aspects here that we should be familiar with as well. The next thing is the types of cells, right? So the next thing that we talk about as it relates to the nervous system is neurons and neuroglia. The parts of a neuron are going to be important here. So those major parts of a neuron, whether it is the soma or the cell body, the dendrites or the axon, like what is that? And so how can we define that? The structural and functional classifications of neurons. And then finally, as it relates to this, I think we talk about a little bit of like of the synapse, right? Like what is the synapse? When we talk about the synapse, then we talk a little bit more as well about some of the neurotransmitters. So you should be familiar with some of the neurotransmitters here. And I mentioned them in the lectures. There's maybe a handful that you should be familiar with, like acetylcholine, right? Acetylcholine is responsible for stimulating. First thing we need to do is an action potential. So how does the messages be? How is the message sent from the cell body across the axon before then it gets to the axon? So the steps of an action potential is what I'm talking about here. Action potential and membrane potential. These are concepts that I talked about in the muscle chapter, but come into significant importance when we talk about the nervous system. So the actions potentials, and then as we mentioned here, neurotransmitters. This is the last part. And so there's the chapter 12 that we'll be focusing on. You can see again divisions of the nervous system, kind of gross divisions of the nervous system, whether it's the central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system, or kind of the more functional components as it relates to them, whether it is the sensory, which is also afferent, the processing or integration, or motor, which is efferent. They also mentioned the big thing here is the neurons and neuroglia. So neurons are really going to focus in the beginning of this chapter, neuroglia a little bit later. But the parts of a neuron, the structural and functional classifications of neurons, what is an action potential and how does that occur, and how does it relate to some resting membrane potential, right? And then finally, the concept of like the different types of neurotransmitters that you should be also be familiar with. And again, that is located right there in the lectures. Chapter 13 involves a little bit more of just the anatomy of the nervous system. So when it relates to the practical, I'm going to give you two examples here that you should be pretty familiar with. Something like the parts of the brain and parts of the spinal cord are going to be the real big components of what you should be familiar with when it comes to chapter 13. So let me just put it in there and the other one is, and so here maybe I'll just have to pull one up here. A quick Wikipedia search here will give us an example of that. I think I got it up there. Okay, so this is where we'll be looking at images like there, right? So this is pretty a nice picture, basics of the neuroanatomy. But you can see here the different lobes of the brain. So you can see here we've got the different lobes, whether it's the frontal lobe, portions of the cerebral cortex, the actual anatomical region. So you should be able to identify these parts. Is what I'm talking is the idea here. As well, not only it's anatomical, so you can see the anatomical, whether it's the frontal lobe, cerebral lobe, but also its functional status, right? So function, I mean, you can see the functional area. Number one is the visual cortex. Number two is an association area. But number three is a very important one, the motor cortex as well. So these are important structures that you should be familiar with. And so that is going to be parts of the brain. The other part here, let me see if they have parts of a spinal cord, maybe not as lucky there, but parts of the spinal cord here, and that's the cross section of the spinal cord, right? So when we look at the cross section of a spinal cord, you will see that there is, I'll go to this one because it gives us some cool kind of stuff. You can see here that there's the gray matter, there's the white matter, there is the afferent or sensory information coming into one part, there is the efferent or the motor information, as we mentioned there. So being familiar with the different parts of the brain as well as the different parts of the spinal cord is going to be pretty helpful there as it relates to the anatomy of the nervous system. And then finally, the last part of this section here that we'll talk about is going to be the somatic nervous system. And so really we're just talking, what we're talking about here is the pathways that occurs, the pathways that occur up of the nervous system from the periphery to the brain. So let me just, as I'm looking for my page here, I remember the senses. So the pathways of taste and smell, which are both kind of chemical processes, taste and smell, odorants and taste. The visual, so sight, as well as balance, kind of this idea of kind of the awareness of self in our head propulsion from the proprioception. But another one here is the sense of hearing. So we talk about those senses, and then there's some other ascending pathways. And what do I mean by an ascending pathway? Well, an ascending pathway is a pathway that travels up, right? It travels from the periphery, from the sensory component up to the brain and spinal cord. So there are two ascending pathways that I'll ask you to be familiar with. Those ascending pathways include the corticospinal tract. Oh, excuse me. That's the descending pathway. The dorsal column system that interprets soft touch, vibration. Kind of gives us the concepts of kind of like a lot of that proprioception, gives us the idea of like where we are, all that really soft touch, kind of really fast pathway when it relates to movement. And so that information goes up one pathway, and then the other one is the make sure I get it spelled here right for you guys. This is called the lateral spinal thalamic tract. And then the descending pathway, the major descending pathway that I'm going to ask you to identify here is the corticospinal tract. And so there's the chapter 14. So again, to focus here in this semester, we'll be looking at the next couple of weeks, what's left of the semester. Chapter 12, nervous tissue, divisions of kind of the general functions of the nervous system, the cells involved, and how an action potential occurs. Chapter 13, the parts of the brain, parts of the spinal cord. And then in chapter 14, the somatic nervous system, we start to look at the pathways that incorporate our senses, incorporate touch and pain, and then ultimately the pathway that gives us movement. And so that is the announcements here for week 14. I'll wrap it up here with a little bit of encouragement as you guys are just cruising along. I encourage you guys to continue up the good work, and we'll get you here through the semester. Thank you again, and take care.